I don't understand this Bidenomics. He's bragging on it. Since he took office, food prices in aggregate are 35% higher, and gasoline is $2 a gallon higher. That's after he substantially reduced the strategic petroleum reserve and never really replaced it. And we're now starting to see that job growth is, despite all this inflationary pressures, is starting to slow, and GDP is starting to slow. So what I'm getting at is that we have to put it in perspective. He printed $4 trillion in 2.5 years, $4 trillion. And he poured it in at a time renewed demand as people came out of COVID and there was supply chains, and he created a rampant inflation. That in turn forced the Federal Reserve, that had been so promiscuous in printing money anyway before this, they had to raise interest rates. And I don't know, they haven't been able to stop the inflation. It's still, he keeps saying, I don't understand it. He keeps saying, I reduced inflation this month. I came down. That's like a guy who drinks 6 martinis every night, and then he brags, I have 2 less tonight than I did last night. Bidenomics would be an object of shame, of reproach, of disparagement, but he keeps bragging on it, and I don't get it. And then I read these crazy Washington Post, New York Times, Atlantic Monthly, and these people just inadvertently, offhandedly, nonchalantly, they say, well, Biden, despite criticism of his age or his cognitive lapses, he has an enviable record. No, he doesn't. People can't afford to take a mortgage out at 7%. The inflation rate is not just 5 fossilized percent, it's aggregate. It's on top of what the price was last month, the 2 months before, a year before, 2 years before. So it's a disaster, and the standard of living is crashing. And so I don't get it, why he would, but I do get it in the sense, if you were Joe Biden's handlers, you get in a room and you say, hey, let's do the foreign policy. And we had the skedaddle and the 50 billion in arms stuff we left behind in Afghanistan. That was a disaster. We don't know what's going to happen in Russia. All we know is we've given them 1 million artillery shells, and we depleted our javelin stocks, and we're not reproducing them. And that's kind of characteristic of our administration, that we print money or we give away stuff and then we don't replace it. Well, how about the Middle East? Well, Robert Malley, our Iranian delegate that kept trying to resurrect this disastrous Iran. So the Middle East is a mess. And Abraham Accords, China sent a balloon across. We didn't do anything. They embarrassed Jake Sullivan, remember, and Blinken in March when we came into office in Anchorage. And then they kind of lied about the COVID. We trying to help them a little bit and didn't really press them. Okay, well, then we don't do the foreign policy stuff. We have the border. No, we don't have the border. We have 7 million illegal entries. Well, we have the crime issue. No, we don't, Joe. Crime is exploding. So maybe they think the economy is not as bad as the crime problem, the foreign policy disaster, the border. I don't know. But I wouldn't brag on Bidenomics. You know what I mean? So with Trump, it was always, his magic moment was, let's face it, was December 2019. If you had looked at that, and I went back the other day and looked at the press accounts, I just Googled dates in December of 2019, right on the eve of COVID. We had record low unemployment for peacetime, almost. It was about 3.2, 3.3. Black unemployment was at an all-time low. We had almost 2% growth. The inflation rate was about 1.5. The interest rates were essentially 0. He had a big deficit. That was his Achilles heel. And he had started on the wall, and he had defeated his enemies in court. He'd fired people in the Pentagon that did not help him. He'd fired people in Homeland Security. He'd threatened Mexico. Mexico had guards, and he was on the cusp of starting to build the new wall, and he would have built it. And there was no illegal immigration anyway in 2019 in December. Some, but nothing like it there had been before. He was solving that problem. There was no crime. The crime was way down. Iraq was stabilizing. Iran was terrified of them. They were not trying to ram American ships. He had negotiated a solution to the Afghanistan. Maybe he was withdrawing too rapidly, but he was going to keep Bagram. He was a businessman, and he was going to keep about 3,500 troops on that outpost, mostly because we put so much money into it. That's how he thought. So the world was stable. Everybody hated him in Europe, but everybody hated him and paid $100 million more for NATO armaments. And that extra defense expenditure came in handy with Ukraine. And Putin did not invade. I know it seems reductionist, but he invaded in 2008 when the Bush administration was crippled. He invaded in 2014 because Obama had appeased him. He invaded in 2021 because of Afghanistan and Biden's non-compos mentis status and Biden's cyber warfare. Please, if you're going to do cyber warfare, don't attack hospitals, basically. So everything was going good, but the more he did well, there was less tension as far as the left had no answer to that. And all the polls showed he was going to be reelected. And so COVID came along and the rest is history. But notice that the better he did, people were concentrating on tweets. I would meet Republicans who would say, I didn't vote for him, I should have, but my wife or I decided I can't vote for him because of his tweets.